Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Crystal Consonery, and as you all know, May is Mental Health Awareness Month. So this month, as promised, each Friday around 11 a.m. Eastern, I'm going to put out a new video that discusses how trauma impacts our mental health. So this morning, I just want to talk briefly about what trauma really is, right? I want to take some time to introduce trauma, talk a little bit about the different types of trauma and how it affects our brain and our bodies. So, what is trauma? Trauma refers to a deeply distressing or disturbing experience that overwhelms our capacity to cope. It can affect us emotionally, trauma can affect us mentally, physically, and spiritually. It often results from events that involve a threat, either to our safety, our stability, or our sense of control. And it leaves lasting effects on our nervous systems and on our overall well-being. Now, there are various types of trauma. There's acute trauma, and acute trauma is a result from a single isolated incident that is extremely stressful or dangerous. And some examples of an acute trauma could be a car accident, a natural disaster, things like a tornado, an earthquake, a hurricane. It can be the sudden loss of a loved one, or it can be physical or sexual assault. Those are acute traumas. And acute traumas can cause immediate shock, fear, and emotional distress. And some people recover naturally over time, while others may develop traumatic or post-traumatic stress syndrome, which we often refer to as PTSD. And I know a lot of us, when we hear the term PTSD, we automatically think military, but it's post-traumatic stress syndrome. And PTSD refers to any level of traumatic experience that you've been through. So that's acute trauma. Then there's chronic trauma. Chronic trauma is the result of repeated and prolonged exposure to highly stressful events over an extended period of time. It can be things like domestic violence, bullying, long-term illness or hospitalization. It can come from living in a war zone or ongoing emotional or physical abuse. That's chronic trauma. So the impact of chronic trauma is one, it can lead to long-term emotional and psychological issues. Issues such as anxiety, depression, or as I mentioned, PTSD. Chronic trauma can also wear down the nervous system, making it harder to regulate emotions or for us to feel safe. So that's acute trauma and chronic trauma. Then there's complex trauma. And complex trauma refers to exposure to multiple traumatic events, often of an invasive or an interpersonal nature. And it usually occurs in childhood or during our early life stages. And some examples of complex trauma would be ongoing neglect or abuse in childhood. It can be growing up with a caregiver who has mental illness or substance abuse issues, being trafficked or exploited, or exposure to domestic violence as a child. So you yourself may not be being abused, but you may be witnessing ongoing episodes of domestic violence. And the impact of complex trauma affects our development. It affects our identity and it affects our sense of self-worth and our ability to trust. It affects our capacity to form healthy relationships. It often results in deep-rooted emotional and relational challenges that require specialized healing approaches. So, as I mentioned, there are three types of trauma. There's acute trauma, chronic trauma, and complex trauma. And remember, trauma is more than a moment, right? It can rewire how we think, it can affect how we feel, and how we respond to life. So those are the types of trauma. Now let's talk a little bit about the brain's response to trauma and the fight, flight, freeze, and fawn syndrome. So when we experience trauma or when there's a perceived threat, our brain activates the survival response system, an automatic reaction that's designed to protect us, right? And that's good because we need that protection. This system, though, is primarily controlled by the amygdala, and that's the brain's fear center, and it signals the body to prepare for danger. So when this happens, we instinctively respond in one of four ways. We fight, we flight, right? We freeze, or we fawn. And each response is rooted in self-protection, even if it doesn't feel like a conscious choice. So that fight response, that's the one we know, right? That's reacting to danger with aggression or force to protect ourselves. Signs of the fight response could be arguing, yelling, physical fighting, feeling intense anger or irritability. And the brain activity that occurs there in the amygdala, it overrides rational thinking to prepare for confrontational boosting. We get that boost of adrenaline and physical strength, right? So that's the brain's activity. The amygdala overrides rational thinking, and it does that to prepare for confrontation, and we get that boost of adrenaline and physical strength. And you may ask, well, why does that happen? It happens because the brain believes that the best way to survive is to stand our ground and overpower the threat. That's when we respond in fight. But then there's the flight response. And the flight response is escaping or fleeing from a perceived threat. And signs of the flight response is running away, literally or figuratively. It's excessive worry, panic attacks, feeling trapped, and needing to escape situations. The brain's activity during the flight response, there's stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol that flood the body, and it does that to enable rapid movement and quick thinking. So, why does this happen? It happens because the brain concludes that getting away from danger is the safest option. So, when we're in that flight response, we're not going to fight, we're not going to stand there. Everything in us is preparing for us to get away, and all of our energies is geared and given to us getting away. So there's the fight response, the flight response, and then there's the freeze response. And the freeze response is becoming immobile or mentally shutting down when faced with danger. And signs of the freeze response would be disassociation. We don't want to have anything to do with it. This is not happening. There's numbness. There's the inability to speak or to move. There's feelings of being stuck or paralyzed. Those are signs of the freeze response. And when we're in that freeze response, our brain activity is something like this. The body and the mind will freeze. And the reason it does this is to avoid detection or to minimize harm when fighting or fleeing feels impossible. So if we feel like we can't stand up to this threat, or we feel like we're in a position where we can't get away, we freeze. We just can't move. We become immobile. So that's the freeze response. So there's the fight, there's flight, there's freeze, and then there's one that's not often talked about, and that's the fawn response. And the fawn response is attempting to appease or to please the threat to avoid harm. So signs of the fawn response would be people pleasing, difficulty setting boundaries, agreeing to things that are out of our control, losing our voice, or having that need to maintain peace. And quite honestly, the fawn response is what we see most, but it's what we talk about the least. The brain activity that goes on during the fawn response is there's that survival instinct that shifts, and it shifts towards creating safety through submission or cooperation. And the reason this happens is because the brain learns that staying safe might depend on making ourselves as non threatening and as accommodating as possible. So often we hear people that say, oh, I battle with people pleasing, or I just want everything to be peaceful. It's because something in them has told them that the best way for you to survive is to make yourself as accommodating as you can, to make everyone around you as comfortable as they can be, and then no harm will come to you. That's the fawn response. So there's the fight response, flight response, freeze response, and fawn response. And these responses are natural and automatic. They're not conscious decisions. When there's a threat, we do not stop and think, okay, am I gonna fawn, flight, freeze, what am I going to do? Our brain instinctively kicks in. And understanding, guys, that fight, flight, freeze, and fawn helps us to survive trauma. And it recognizes that, and we need to recognize that these reactions are attempts to protect ourselves. They're not signs of weakness. So if you find yourself in a threatening situation, or if you've been in a threatening situation and you're like, wow, I wish I would have fought instead of just standing there taking it. Don't be so hard on yourself. Your brain kicked in and it was what you knew to do in that moment. So, trauma does, however, change our brain functions. Um, it changes in the amygdala, the hippocampus, and the prefrontal cortex. Trauma doesn't just affect our emotions, right? It physically changes the way our brain functions. The three more main parts of our brain that are deeply impacted by traumatic experiences are the amygdala, the hippocampus, and the prefrontal cortex. So I want to take a moment and just break that down for you. So the amygdala, that's the brain's alarm system. And the role that it plays is that it is responsible for detecting threats and triggering the body's fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response. In people who've experienced trauma, the amygdala becomes overactive, meaning it stays on high alert, even when real danger is no longer present. You may hear people joking and say, oh, she stays on 10. That's because something has happened that's communicated that you need to always be vigilant. And signs might be feeling anxious or fearful without a clear reason. It's overreacting to minor triggers. It's constantly scanning your environment. You're hypervigilant. Trauma makes the amygdala super sensitive and it causes the brain to act like danger is everywhere all the time. And then the hippocampus, right? That's the memory center of the brain. And the hippocampus, it processes and stores our memories, especially distinguishing between past and present experiences. But trauma can cause the hippocampus to shrink and to become less effective. It may struggle to organize memories properly, which would lead to flashbacks or to a sense that the traumatic events are happening right now. Signs that you may notice are difficulty distinguishing between past trauma and current reality, its intrusive memories or flashbacks, and its disorientation or feeling stuck in past events. So, trauma disrupts our memory processing and it makes it harder for the brain to recognize that the danger is over. That's how our hippocampus, the memory center, is affected by trauma. And then there's the prefrontal cortex. That's our thinking brain. And the prefrontal cortex, it controls our rational thinking, our decision making, our self awareness, and our emotional regulation. And trauma causes the prefrontal cortex to become underactive. This makes it harder to think clearly, to regulate our emotions, and to feel a sense of control. And signs that you may notice are trouble focusing or making decisions, overwhelming emotions that feel hard to manage, acting impulsively, or feeling emotionally or out of control. Trauma weakens the brain's ability to reason and to regulate emotions, and it leaves our survival instincts in charge. So, guys, just remember that trauma rewires the brain to prioritize survival over logic, and that causes lasting effects on our emotions, on our memory, and our decision making. And healing from trauma often involves helping these brain areas to relearn how to feel safe, how to process memories correctly, and how to regain our emotional balance. Living with unprocessed trauma can quietly affect our thoughts, our emotions, our behaviors, and our physical health, often without us even realizing the root cause. So, here are a few key signs that I would like for you to watch out for. One is repeating patterns in relationships, right? Attracting emotionally unavailable or unsafe partners, difficulty trusting others or fear of abandonment, becoming overly dependent or emotionally distant. So that's repeating patterns in relationships. The second one is hypervigilance and anxiety. And that looks like constantly on edge, as if something bad is about to happen, being easily startled or overreacting to minor stressors, or trouble relaxing or feeling safe, even in calm environments. That's what hypervigilance and anxiety looks like. Then there's emotional numbness and disconnection. And that looks like feeling emotionally flat. You're disconnected from your feelings. It's difficulty feeling joy, feeling love, or feeling empathy. It's avoiding emotional intimacy or deep conversations. Then there are intrusive thoughts or flashbacks. And that shows up as unwanted memories of past experiences, nightmares, or sudden emotional reactions when you're reminded of the trauma, or feeling like you're back there during certain triggers. You can't distinguish that this is something that's happening in the present and it's not that thing that happened to you before. Then there's avoidance and denial. And the way that shows up in your life, it shows up as avoiding people, places, or situations that bring up the distress. So, say something happened to you in, I don't know, Boston, Massachusetts. So, you may avoid going to Boston, going to Massachusetts, going to anything or any place that may remind you of that. Then there's overeating or using substances to distract or overworking. It's pretending everything is fine when you're struggling inside, right? That's how avoidance and denial shows up. Then there's low self-worth and shame. And that shows up as internalizing blame for things that weren't your fault. You take ownership of everything. There's chronic self-doubt or feeling that you're just not good enough. It shows up as guilt, shame, or believing that you're broken or you're unlovable. That's what low self esteem, low self worth, and shame looks like. Then there are physical symptoms. And you have physical symptoms without a clear cause. There's nothing really medically wrong with you. It shows up as unexplained chronic pain, fatigue, or headaches. It shows up as gastrointestinal issues or immune dysfunctions. It may show up as sleep problems, including insomnia or oversleeping. So that's how it shows up as physical symptoms, right? Without a clear medical cause. And then there's difficulty regulating your emotions. And that shows up as intense mood swings or emotional outbursts, feeling overwhelmed by small stressors, or shutting down and disassociating during conflict. So, what I encourage you guys to remember about this is that these signs, again, they don't mean that you're weak, they don't mean that you're broken. They're normal responses to abnormal experiences. And unprocessed trauma can live in the body and the brain, but healing is possible. It's possible through therapy, it's possible through support, and it's possible through intentional work. So that's what I encourage you guys to remember about this. You can move past trauma. So again, every Friday during the month of May, I'm going to pop in for about 15 minutes just so that we can really have real conversations about trauma and how trauma affects our mental health. So be sure, tune in again next Friday. Have a great day.